everyone. I'm Soon-Young Yoon, the UN representative for International Alliance of Women, and welcome to Changing Leadership for Our Common Agenda and a Futures Summit. This is an intergenerational dialogue as a parallel event to the NGO Forum at CSW 66. We are almost done with 66 and onward to 67. So please use the chat. We'd love to know your name, your organization, where you're located.
The chat. I have written it. I have.
Monique, can you mute Joanna? I think Joanna. Yeah, very good. Okay. And I see here that we have got, right. Please introduce yourself in the chat. There's Joanna from Greece. She is with us today as a speaker. Today, I'll just outline the program a bit for you while we're waiting. We're going to have a wonderful inspiration poem to begin our session. And then we'll have a briefing on what is the Secretary General's Our Common Agenda report, with its 90 recommendations condensed into 5-minute presentation. It's going to be great. And then we'll have one poll to see what your priorities are going forward. We would be very interested in the chat if you put any questions that you have, or you want to say anything to the group. The chat is being recorded as well as the video here. Then we have a wonderful set of TED Talk type presentations where we will hear about the journeys of the wonderful leaders that we have with us on their way to being global citizens and engaged with the UN. We'll have some discussion groups where you'll get a chance to tell your story, but also listen a little bit more to our presenters, come back, and a wind up. And it's going to be a wonderful record for history, because I've discovered that our history is actually our future. So that is what we're doing here today. Let me introduce Emily Marassi, who is actually your moderator for the day. Emily, you want to say a few words and then we'll get going with our program?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I am Dr. Emily Murase, a member of the International Alliance of Women and the United Nations Association of San Francisco, connecting from California today. I served for 15 years as Executive Director of the San Francisco Department on the Status of Women, where I served as a peer leader for the Cities for CEDAW campaign. Many of you will know that the US is just one of 6 countries that has not signed on to the UN Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. Soon-Young's brainchild, Cities for CEDAW, now has over 80 communities, grassroots communities across the United States as a member. I have the privilege of serving as co-moderator for today's event organized by Soon-Young. Soon-Young has been my inspiration since I first saw her in action as president of the NGO Committee on the Status of Women in New York almost 20 years ago. Are you ready to be inspired? Please, Soon-Young.
Thanks so much. Monique, are we recording this?
Yes, we are.
Okay, Monique is helping us here. So let me introduce Jillian Motella from the Philippines, and she is our wonderful young representative here with the International Alliance of Women. And Jillian, go ahead.
Hi, everyone.
I misrepresented you. You're not with the International Alliance of Women. Please give your organization again.
I'm in between a lot of things, but I'm a master's student at Sciences Po. I'm a policy research intern with FOS Feminista, formerly the International Planned Parenthood Federation of Western Hemisphere. So
that is correct. Thanks so much.
No problem. Filipinos have a saying that goes, "Bahala na," which means come what may, I'm told. Don't rock the boat, lay low, I'm told. It's just out of our control. When my mother came from Philippines to Phillipsburg, she was told not to teach her kids the shape of joy in her language, to fill our mouths instead with English and Wonder Bread, and yet somehow I still know the taste of it's out of my control, bahala na. I have questions about things for which I had no name. Who taught me to create myself in the expectation of the other, constructing myself in mirror image, replacing my eyes with theirs, accommodating and compromising until I no longer recognize the self I thought I didn't know, bahala na. Where did I learn that silence after violence would ever keep me safe, bahala na? How old were you when you also learned that that was not true? To speak of what has happened is to lose face, I'm told, to be stoically silenced. Like mountain imperceptible or prey undetected is to survive, I'm told, but I am telling you, I am neither mountain nor prey. I am my mother's daughter, the descendant of ancestors' strength. I am here to ask you, can we create an alternative to trademark dream of assimilation built by hands like mine and my mama's land? Can we map another route than up this mountain we've christened vertical mobility, bogged down by baggage of bahala na, bunkered down, bartering safe passage with bahala na? I am renaming what I believe I already know. Taking pen to paper, renaming myself from colonized to change maker. I am learning to forgive all I did not say, all I did not do when I hummed the tune of bahala na. Now I am striving to lead with love in a world that asks for everything but yet needs more than all. To speak of what has happened, of words stolen, of freedom clipped is to speak freely. To speak freely is to take wing, to reclaim this orphaned mouth, this bruised face, that space which separates me from you. Thank you.
Jillian, thank you so much. And bahala na. We've all learned that word now. It's great. Thanks so much. I'm going to introduce now Nutara Yusuf, who is our global youth coordinator for the C4UN. That's the Coalition for the United Nations. And she's also with the Stimson Center, and she knows everything about this report. So Nutara, can you present to us some of the key ideas that we can take forward with us?
Thank you so much, Soon Young. And I think to say I know everything about this report is an overstatement indeed. I think no one really knows everything about this report at the moment, including the people that maybe wrote the report. But that's the beauty of it, and that kind of is what leads to these discussions and forums. So allow me to quickly share my screen and just run you through the basic ideas behind this report, just so that everyone is kind of on the same page when someone starts talking about the OCA or the Our Common Agenda report. So a very quick overview, just to kind of run you through the process surrounding this report, and then we'll go into the contents of it very quickly, because Sunyan has given me 5 minutes, so we're going to do this as quickly as possible. Okay, so we had in 2020 the UN 75 process when the United Nations turned 75 years old, and there was a very large consultative kind of movement to see where people wanted to see the world, see the United Nations in 2045 or its centenary. The report then called for the Secretary General to produce some kind of outcome document, report, kind of more technocratic recommendation as to how they can take forward the commitments that were made in the political declaration in 2020, or the UN 75 political declaration, which had kind of 12 thematic elements that came off the back of that. So the Our Common Agenda report then had a strong human rights and development focus geared towards kind of accelerating the 2030 agenda. And this big kind of voice was heard of this is a breakdown or breakthrough moment in history. It's now or never, especially coming off of the wake of the pandemic. So the report itself had 90 recommendations and kind of tried to action on these 12 commitments that were made in the political declaration. That was in September 2021. Fast forward a little bit to November 2021, there was a procedural resolution adopted by the General Assembly that welcomed the report with consensus. I think there were 161 votes, but anyone that follows this a little bit clearer can correct me if I'm wrong there. But there was also a call for the President of the General Assembly to initiate follow-up. So in response to this, the President of the General Assembly conducted 5 thematic dialogues that just came to an end. These were on accelerating and scaling up the SDGs and leaving no one behind, accelerating the SDGs or the Sustainable Development Goals through sustainable financing and building trust, frameworks for a peaceful world, promoting peace and international law and digital cooperation, protecting the planet and being prepared for the future, and finally, enhancing international cooperation. So under these 5 thematic clusters, folks from civil society, member states, the Executive Office and Secretary General came together to discuss the Our Common Agenda process and what this means as we drive forwards towards the Summit of the Future. And in kind of the essence of what this conversation is also about changing leadership around the Our Common Agenda report, it was noted in these dialogues that the Summit of the Future would largely be a member state driven process. And so the question then became, how do civil society groups like ours support that process? So that's just a quick overview of kind of where we are now in the timeline of the Our Common Agenda report. But what's actually in the report? There are 4 key pillars across the Our Common Agenda report. First is a renewed social contract, and under this you see items like the World Social Summit, which would convene in 2025 potentially to discuss kind of social protection and baseline rights for all. We see this pillar also has a very large human rights focus. It looks at indicators beyond global gross domestic product. And importantly as well, just something to flag is the Transforming Education Summit, which is to happen at the end of this year in September. And this is again a proposed kind of forum to bring people together to discuss SDG 4 quality education, especially at the wake of the pandemic, where education was lost for many people. Another pillar is the focus on the future, and this kind of also connects with the protecting global commons and delivering global public goods. So under focus on the future is where we see the Summit of the Future proposed for 2023. But there's also, interestingly, an envoy for future generations. And here I'm just highlighting a couple key themes. There are obviously 90 recommendations, but these are just a few highlights. The envoy for future generations proposes to kind of bring what we see for the future and protecting the commons and having some kind of stakeholder responsibility for future generations in the conversation of today, which is exciting, and it's something that we're looking to see what's going to happen around this process. And so just to map out a little bit the connection between the high-level advisory board under the Global Commons and Global Public Goods and the Declaration on Future Generations and the Summit of the Future, essentially a high-level advisory board has now been established, actually, and is going to produce a report that will hopefully feed into the Summit of the Future, and then further help us develop a Declaration on Future Generations as a potential outcome coming off the back of the Summit of the Future. And why is this all important for an intergenerational dialogue? Well, because you could potentially rename the Summit of the Future the Summit for Our Future, because it is about the roadmaps, the channels, the institutions, the decisions that are made at this critical juncture that are going to affect the years to come and are going to affect how young people will be able to engage with the future to come. So it is something to just kind of be aware of, which is why I'm spending a little bit of time explaining that. And then the 4th pillar is an upgrade of the UN. This is about multi-stakeholder engagement. This is about inclusive governance. There's some amounts of institutional reform being kind of considered, but importantly as well at kind of this critical juncture of what we're seeing in the world, a new agenda for peace and what that means and what accountability means going into the future. So on top of that, then there are a couple tracks to just be aware of when kind of operationalizing this Our Common Agenda report. So there's 90 recommendations. It's become rather a manifesto of ideas. And a lot of what's going on now is trying to pull these ideas apart and see what's going on. And what the Secretary General is recommending to member states, to the global community, headed into the centenary of the United Nations in 2045. So a little kind of timeline here is the Transforming Education Summit is taking place at the end of this year. the Summit of the Future at the end of next year in 2023, alongside the UNGA, the World Social Summit in 2025, and there are 7 high-level tracks that they hope to kind of build on, establish, the Global Digital Compact and the work that the Our Common Agenda report is doing in terms of the global, the digital side of things is very ambitious, very bold. But there's also some critique coming from the fact that this doesn't seem very strategic. There's a list of 90 things. What do we do with it? Where are the priorities? Where is the sequencing? There's also a question of how do we manage? How do we delineate? How do we delegate the work that's to be done in the follow-up process from the Our Common Agenda report? And this is why conversations like these become very important, because it's also about who's going to lead the efforts coming off the back of this report, who's going to kind of take charge. And one thing that we do see in the OCA is an attempt to be very neutral in its language and kind of as common as possible. It does fail to acknowledge certain groups and certain niches and certain points of view, including the feminist point of view, including regional points of view, and to some extent, including the youth perspective as well. And so having the civil society voice complement, add to, and build the OCA report and the processes going forward become particularly important at this juncture. And I will stop there and hope that I haven't run too far over time-wise.
In fact, Nutara, I have a query for you. Do you think that a feminist critique of the OCA report is justified? You have to say yes.
The answer is yes. No. I mean, Sun Young, you can pay me later for the statement I'm about to make, but no, I do genuinely believe that there is validation that will come from not just a feminist critique of the report. I do think that that's very important, because there are certain aspects, for example, the new agenda for peace, that will absolutely benefit from a feminist critique, because when you think about kind of the culture of peace and you look at it from that perspective, there is now just a question of what does a new agenda for peace mean? So this kind of expertise is not just critique, but it's actually helpful, concrete methodology and operationalizing kind of pathways for the community to build on. So I think it's absolutely warranted at this time, but as well, not just from a feminist perspective, I think from regional perspectives, I think from youth perspectives, from minority group perspectives, the more voices and interpretations we can have in the OCA report, and keeping in mind to not kind of stay in a consultative trap, but use these voices to develop and operationalize the report, I think is what would be welcomed by the global community, is my hope as well.
Thank you. And if you ever have ideas, just send them all to her. And she'll bring them to the steering committee of the C4UN, on which I sit, and some of our speakers sit. So thanks so much for that. I think we have a poll. Monique, shall we do a quick poll so we can see what priorities people have in general? Oh, here we are. So it's a very simple question. On your computer or your mobile phone or other device, just answer this question. What is your priority in the Secretary General's report, which covers basically a revitalization, a revisioning, a renewal of the UN system? Is it peace and security? Is it climate emergency? Or is it inequalities? I think you were going to be able to do all three, but you can't. Apparently, you're just going to prioritize. What is your priority there? So can you start voting? I am going to make my vote here.
We'll give people just another few seconds.
Mm-hmm. Monique, I think you see the results, or do I see the results?
I'll share the results when I close
Thank
it.
you. Thank you. Monique is our invisible, but like totally important person helping us here.
Okay.
Let us know when you want to give us the results here.
Here we are.
Oh, okay. So I can you all see these? This is great. I love it. So 40% of us really want peace and security to be at the top. 26% are concerned with the climate emergency, 34% with inequalities. I think that if we could all choose something, we would choose a number 4, which would be all of the above. So thanks for participating in that. Let me turn the program now over to Dr. Emily Morassi, who has the San Francisco Bridge right behind her because that is where she is situated. And I will see you later.
Thank you so much, Sun-Yang. We are so excited to have 7 of our leaders, women leaders in the movement here with us today. And I will introduce them as they come up, but I just want to list the order in which they will speak. Maria Espinosa, then Jillian Montilla, Joanna Mondanara, Nudara Youssef, Cheryl Hales, Dr. Uzma Gul, and Safra Rameshwar. So first we will open with Maria Espinosa. She is a celebrated Ecuadorian academic, diplomat, politician, and poet. In 2018, Maria became the president of the United Nations General Assembly 73rd session, the 4th woman in history and the first from Latin America and the Caribbean to be elected to preside over this body since 1945. She served as Minister of Foreign Affairs twice, Minister of the National Defense, and advisor for the constitutional process. She's a member of the Group of Women Leaders for Change and Inclusion, a member of the Lancet Commission on COVID-19, on the Science Panel for the Amazon, and a fellow at the Bosch Academy in Germany. And we have asked each of these women to speak for 5 minutes about their personal journey to become global citizens. Maria.
Thank you, Emily. First of all, I'm delighted to be here among such women in power and powerful women. The truth is I had prepared more a reflection to follow up on Nudara's excellent presentation about the future of our multilateral architecture and the place for us, for women, for gender equality, and for a feminist approach. And following the path of Sun-Yung when she asked, we need a feminist critique of the Our Common Agenda. I fully agree with her. It is a pending homework, but of course, I have read the Our Common Agenda wearing my feminist glasses. It happens that the Our Common Agenda mentions gender equality 23 times and the word women 34 times. Which I think it's encouraging in this 80-page report. I think that the approach and the focus on gender equality and women has a cross-cutting presence throughout the report. And I think these are very good news. Basically, one of the main objectives of the OCA report is to achieve gender equality through the realization of equal rights, participation of women in all spheres of decision making, the economic inclusion and empowerment of women, and the eradication of gender-based violence. So this is part of the beating heart of this report. And so, sorry, I'm speaking about something different. If someone has questions to me on my personal journey, I'll be more than happy to share. But I think it's very important that we take this opportunity, but also these incredible panelists here to say, yes, we need to really advocate for a feminist approach to upgrading the United Nations to the reform agenda. And I think that when we see that the guiding principles of the Our Common Agenda are basically solidarity, shared responsibility, inclusion, participation, intergenerational equity. I think that these are the principles and the values that we should aim and ask for in this process. It's not only about participation and the voice of women, especially from civil society, but it's also making sure that any outcome, the summits that Nudara, explained to us at the beginning, but they do have women and girls front and center. When we speak about the need for a new social contract, for this trust deficit, for the security deficit, I think that we cannot even think about a new social contract without these three pillars, which are inclusion, protection, and participation. And I think that that's exactly what our efforts and our energy should aim at. If we look at any front, the poverty numbers, the climate victims numbers, the vulnerability indexes, unfortunately, as you all well know, women really pay the highest price. If we, and it's a paradox, because when you think that 73% of the health workforce, now that we are experiencing a new wave in COVID, 73% are women, but women do not have a say in the national boards and decision-making spaces in COVID response institutional mechanisms. We know that 1.4 billion women lack protection from domestic, sexual, or economic violence. Wherever you look, the arithmetics of inequality are out there. I don't think that we can think about a future for us, as Nudara was saying at the beginning, our future, if we do not think about gender equality and the full enjoyment of rights for women and girls worldwide. And as you know, I was closely connected to the Generation Equality Forum process. And I think that we have like a wealth of commitments, of resources, and in a work plan on these 6 action coalitions and a new pact for women, peace, and security that were adopted in the Generation Equality Forum. I was just part of a meeting of a 24-hour journey on generation equality last week with a new executive director of UN Women. And believe me that we do have a very strong roadmap. We need to connect our common agenda, the reform process, and the implementation of the Generation Equality Forum commitments, which include $40 billion to be invested in women's rights and gender equality. So I see all these processes and landmark moments as being absolutely interconnected. The 2023 Summit of the Future has to be the summit for women and about women and younger generations. We cannot think about a future that is a better future for us, that is a safer future for us, that is a more equal future if we are not there, taking the decisions, raising our voices. That's what the group of women leaders for change and inclusion are about, to make our voices heard. And I'm sure that you are going to be the allies, the partners that we need to make this collective dream become true. And the collective dream is about living in a world of peace, of equality, and of sustainability. So thank you, Emily. I think I have gone a little beyond my 5 minutes, but I'm really eager to listen to our sisters here. Back to you, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam President. In preparation for today's event, our speakers were asked to review the Our Common Agenda program and will provide their reflections. Next, I want to reintroduce to you Jillian Montilla. She is a feminist, activist, and part-time poet. Jillian is a master's student in human rights and humanitarian action at Sciences Po Paris, where she concentrates in gender studies. In 2021, Jillian joined Full Feminista as a policy research intern, supporting the Alliance's evidence-based advocacy on sexual and reproductive health and rights. She has experience as an anti-racist grassroots organizer and project manager aiming to enhance political participation of young migrant women. As the 2020 UN Women Youth spoken word poet, Jillian strives to reclaim the creative power of language to sustain her pursuit of gender and race equitable world. She's the author of a very powerful poem, I'm Not Your Miss Saigon, about her rebellion against the objectifying, fetishizing male gaze that characterized her entry into womanhood as a first-generation Filipinx American. You can find her and her poetry on YouTube. Welcome, Jillian.
Thank you so much for that introduction and speaking after that introduction and after Madam President. I'm going to do my best. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for the invitation to share my voice with such principled and strong women, and know that the opportunity is not lost on me. My name is Jillian, and my pronouns are she, her, and I'm a first-generation Filipino American. My parents immigrated from the Philippines to Phillipsburg, New Jersey, which was an aging river town built on what is now known as I now know as the Lenni Lenape land, but what I knew then had the oldest high school football rivalry in the whole United States. I went to Phillipsburg Public School, where I did marching band and ran cross country. And yes, I was much better at marching band than cross country. I took my AP classes in one of the 20 or so temporary trailers that leaked when it rained. I avoided math classes and discovered my love of language with the encouragement of some amazing teachers. I grew up entrenched in some of the richest of American traditions, and for that I'm grateful. But I also grew up entrenched in a world that felt foreign to both the diversity we see represented on the panel today and the power concentrated in what were mythic places like New York City or Washington, DC, or Paris, where I'm now studying. When I was growing up, there were not many people in leadership positions that looked like me. And growing up with that diversity and representation, you're left to believe that power can only look and act one way. But I've been reflecting on where I learned the values that lead me today, to speak truth, to act kindly, to reach out to those most sidelined. And besides my mom, I see her sister, my Tita Namon. Tita Namon came from the Philippines to stay with us for a bit when I was in elementary school. And I didn't know it then, but Tita Namon was a civil engineer and was on her way to becoming the first woman mayor of my mom's hometown in the Philippines. I remember shadowing her as she did chores and around the house and talking for hours while we folded laundry or cut vegetables. She would always encourage me to befriend the kids that didn't have playmates at recess. She instilled in me a deep sense of public service, respect for others, and a belief that my voice and my actions mattered. I carried these values with me to Rider University, where I joined the Model UN team. And this also happened to be the first time that I engaged with the United Nations system. I remember the thrill of going up and speaking in front of a room of my peers, learning agenda setting and the art of diplomacy, then off to conference and addressing an entire committee, shaping narratives, building consensus. I remember being finally under the soaring ceilings of the United Nations headquarters in New York City for the first time. 1,000 languages rolling around in a spirit of mutual respect. The second most formative time I interacted with the United Nations system was 2 years ago. My dear friend, Noemi, a reproductive health and rights activist from Switzerland, encouraged me to submit my spoken word poetry to a contest sponsored by NGO CSW, which I won, and it felt like electricity. It unlocked my voice at a time when I was battling with both the imposter syndrome of being at a school like Sciences Po and winning the contest with the message that I brought was a vote of confidence that I deserve to be here, that I deserve to take up space, and that I deserve to be heard. To believe this, even inconsistently, however imperfectly, has brought me to so many different places. It's brought me to work on political participation in young migrant women, focused on CDOT, to find myself as a grassroots anti-racist organizer, to work with the UN Special Rapporteur on freedom of religion or belief, to now work with FOS Feminista, a feminist alliance promoting sexual and reproductive health and rights of women and girls and gendered non-conforming people. Drawing the through line from my involvement in Model United Nations and writing poetry with NGO CSW to all of this, to this very moment, I support the idea of a youth council and a future summit in 2023. Participation creates ownership, buy-in, it fosters trust, belief, and solidarity. The establishment of Youth Council sends a clear message that this agenda and this future belongs to us too. But in seeking the voices of young people, we need to be careful not to make this another add women and stir. The creation of a Youth Council, if responsive to the needs of the people most concerned, if feminist in the way that we organize it, and if consulted on topics other than just those youth-centered, would be key in legitimizing the voices of the youth at the United Nations. I close with my advice to young people who want to be global leaders, and that the goal is not to be liked, it's not to be an authority, it's to say something real, to change something that needs to be changed, and to disrupt what must be disrupted. We're all better for it. And with that, thank you.
Thank you so much, Jillian, for sharing your inspirational story. Let's see, next up is Joanna Manganara, but I know she is trying to get her video going. So we're going to come back to Joanna to see if maybe, Joanna, if you might want to try logging off and then rejoining the group, maybe your video will work. Then we want to see your lovely face. So I'm going to go to the next speaker. We'll come back to you, Joanna, and see if you can get you on video. So next is Nudara Yusuf. She was born in the UK, educated in India and the UK. She serves as the Global Governance Innovation Network Facilitator at the Washington, DC based Stimson Center. She's been a global youth coordinator for the Coalition for the UN We Need. And last month, she participated in the President of the General Assembly's Expert Dialogues for the Common Agenda report. She's the founder and leader of several grassroots NGOs in India and the UK, focusing primarily on skills-based development of youth in civil society. She has actively worked to mobilize young people in the face of disaster relief and to shift digital engagement during the pandemic. Having spent time at Yale studying the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, her interests lie at the intersection of skills-based empowerment and the policy environment which enables us. Please welcome back Nudara.
Thank you so much, Emily. And it's truly wonderful to be speaking at this panel and surrounded by such an amazing community of women and those supporting the kind of the voice of women as well. So this is great. Thank you. So just to, Sunyoung and Emily, you asked me to tell everyone a little bit about my story and my journey. As you said, I was born in the UK. I went to high school in Chennai, and South India. It was as much as I'm extremely aware of how much my parents have supported me, my community has supported me. There was always just a lack of access to information, a lack of access to resources, a lack of access to knowledge, and so it was a lot of me trying to go out and see what was happening in the world and somewhat understanding it, but always finding it a little bit difficult to get a grip on the landscape. And I think from a role model's perspective then, it was hard for me to pin down a specific role model because I didn't find anyone that shared the same journey as me. But I've learned to kind of not necessarily fixate on a single person, but to admire people for their own journeys. And that includes people like Sunyoung, like Maria, who I have the pleasure of now working with. But knowing that everyone has their kind of struggles that they've gone through and tried to overcome to be in these positions is just something that I'm extremely in awe of constantly. And I do have to give a lot of credit to my parents, who, despite the kind of conservative culture that you often see in South India, always said, run as fast as you can. It was never tread carefully or don't shake the boat. It was, you know, rock the boat and turn it over and find another one if you need to, which was a support system that I am always so grateful for. But so I went on from South India to study philosophy, politics, and economics in the UK. I did model UN. I applied for internship. I was your typical UN nerd, you know, and then I got a potential offer to continue my studies later on, and kind of research and stay in London, but at the same time got an unexpected internship offer from UNDP. And so in the spur of the moment, I was always told I was book smart, but not particularly street smart. So I was like, you know what, I'm going to go fix that. So decided to take the internship instead of continuing research in kind of a theoretical sense. That led to a couple different contracts at UNDP, and I always stayed in touch with Coalition for the UN We Need, who I'd come to know over panels, over my experiences with Model UN, in fact. And I think something at some point just kind of clicked for me. I always stayed in touch with civil society partners and friends, and realized that I saw the flaws in the UN system and working within the UN and what that takes. And I started to realize that at some point, this kind of global governance innovation, big thinking happens not just from within the system, but with those that work with it, from civil society, from these stakeholders that have maybe been in and out of the system a little bit, but are well aware of the kind of big picture. And this kind of eventually led to me jumping back to Coalition for the UN We Need and Stimson Center, and trying to tackle these bigger questions of who's engaging, where is access from, and keeping in mind how much I've struggled in the past to gain that kind of access and that kind of transparency. What do we do to make sure that future generations are able to have that information at their hand? Because I think very often it's easy to take for granted information and access to knowledge, which so many people in the world unfortunately don't have. So that leads me on to why I'm a kind of big advocate for the Youth Council and the Summit of the Future process. Gillian mentioned, it's important for just saying that we're here, that we have something to say, but I also think it's got a couple different additional purposes that I'd like to highlight. So the Summit of the Future is also a collective moment. It's a moment for us to think about the future, but it's also going to be interesting for us to see how we can change leadership moving towards the future. I think what we want to see at the SOTF, the Summit of the Future, is, as Maria said, women at the forefront, young people at the forefront, groups of minorities at the forefront, being a part of the decision-making process, not just all the consultative processes that have led up to now. I think it's time to start moving beyond consensus building and discussion, whilst that still needs to happen, but start really thinking about strategic development and strategic action. And so for me, the Summit of the Future is going to be an important point in time where the international community is able to reassess the way it approaches global governance and multilateralism. And I really hope that as a community internationally, we do take advantage of that moment and don't just kind of let it slide on the sidelines of the UNGA. So on that. And the second, on the UN Youth Council and the Youth Office proposal as well, what I've come to find is young people don't necessarily have a knowledge center within themselves. So my experience is very different to Gillian's experience, which is very different to Safira's experience or Uzma's experience, and many experiences of several other young people around the world. And whether it be someone from civil society, a youth ambassador, a youth advisor, the UN Youth Envoy's Office, all of these people work on different things. And the international community has a tendency to bracket us into one group called the young people, but we're not one homogenous group. And so the importance of the UN Youth Office and bodies like the UN Youth Council will be to bring together, collectively organize and maximize and emphasize the knowledge across young people, not just assuming that that's one bracket that can be grouped into kind of one unit, but acknowledging the fact that there are differences amongst young people. and that their knowledge and that the work that they do needs to be managed and coordinated in some way globally. And I think this will be the specific added value that bodies like the UN Youth Office and the UN Youth Council bring, along with increasing access and outreach to young people. Because currently the UN Youth Envoy does what she can, but she's one person with an office that is funded for that one person. It's not got the institutional funding or capacity that it requires to do that kind of mass level of outreach. So we really hope that this is going to help push forward that kind of agenda. And so finally, very quickly, what do I believe is something to say to young women who are kind of looking to enter the sphere, as a young woman looking to enter the sphere myself? So advice to peers, let that be the case. I think the first thing I do is to speak to and learn from trailblazers. I think this is why intergenerational dialogues like this are so important. It's not just about discussing issues from different perspectives. That, yes, that's great. The collective intelligence generated from that is fantastic and it's important, but it's also knowledge transfer. It's preserving knowledge capital. And I think this is why these kind of intergenerational forums and convenings and being able to discuss and have conversations with women that kind of led the path is incredible. But also the final thing I'd say is just playing to your strengths, whatever gender you identify with, whatever kind of background that you have. I think it's important to acknowledge those differences. I think it's important to embrace your identity and not feel the need to conform to some ideal of what a global governance worker looks like or what a diplomat looks like. I think it's important to embrace your story and to tell your story, because in the stories that are being told today, I'm so inspired. So just communicating that, I think, is extremely important.
Thank you so much, Nudara. You're truly a force of nature. I want to welcome our very diverse audience, whose members are from Istanbul, Switzerland, Congo, Korea, Salt Lake City, the Netherlands, Bulgaria, Uganda, and New York. Next will be Joanna Manganara. She apologizes. There's something wrong with her camera, but she has many things she'd like to share, so we'll proceed. Joanna is a Greek stateswoman, champion of women's rights, who served as president of the International Alliance of Women and chief representative to the United Nations for that organization. Prior to that, she served as Minister Counselor for Human Rights at the Greek Ministry of Foreign Affairs for 25 years. She's an expert in advocacy on human rights, especially of vulnerable groups, children, disabled, refugees, and migrants, on social issues, including social development and women's human rights in the context of international organizations. Joanna.
Thank you, Emily, and I'm very sorry for this inconvenience. No camera, but I just discovered it. 2 days ago, I had no problem with Zoom. Anyway, so I was born in Athens and I went to the American college. So I was very early, within the culture, the American culture and the way the American schools worked at the time. It was very, very different from what was happening in Greece. When I was growing up, the most influential adult in my life, besides my parents, was a lady, Alice Marangopoulos, who was professor of criminology at Fountain University in Athens and sister of a teacher of mine at school. She was a role model for me. She was a feminist and an activist, and I was very much impressed, inspired by her ideas and her enthusiasm in life. Later on, she invited me to join a Greek feminist organization, the League of Women's Rights, which she was president. The organization was very well known in my country, as it did a lot concerning gender equality and women's human rights. This organization was a member of the International Alliance of Women, where Alice Marangopoulos became, later on in the 90s, president of the Alliance. Later on, I became a member of the Alliance and worked for a number of years as regional vice president for Europe and the representative of IAW to the European Women's Lobby. In 2013, I was elected president of the Alliance. Now, from 1975 to 1995, the UN sponsored 4 international conferences on women that raised awareness and in many ways significantly changed how countries dealt with gender equality and gender discrimination up to then. As I was an activist feminist in my country and knowledgeable in these issues, I was asked by women's groups and the ministry to represent my country at the Commission on the Status of Women. In the meantime, I joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and started working at the Department of International Organizations. I have to say that, just a moment. In the main, concerning question 4, do you support the idea of a youth council and a future summit in 2023? I have to say that I support very much the idea of a youth council and the future summit in 2023, because I believe that it's time to include the voices of youth who will come after us and to be better prepared for the challenges ahead. Young people will inherit the consequences of the decisions we take, but they are barely implicated in decision making. Yet we have good examples of leadership and of involvement by youth. And not only that, we have also evidence that this greatly enriches our thinking, our planning, and our decisions. Our common agenda proposes meaningful and effective youth engagement, both within and outside the UN. A youth council, in my view, would facilitate the involvement of youth in decision making. We support very much of these ideas. The Secretary General has made many proposals. I will refer to some of them. I support all. The Secretary General makes proposals concerning youth, the establishment of a UN Futures Lab, Declaration on Future Generations, a UN Special Envoy, a formal youth dialogue as a permanent future of CSW. Now, concerning my advice to young women that would be very much interested with what my advice concerning young women that would like to become global leaders and global citizens. My advice would be that they should be very much interested with what they are doing and be well informed about developments at the international level concerning the issues they are dealing with. They should be able to produce good ideas, constructive ones, and be able to implement them as well. They should develop good relations with feminist women's organizations and individuals that have the same approach or are interested in the same issues. They should be ready to discuss aspects of projects they have with many different people and take into account their comments. They should always be ready to discover interesting and qualified people that make a difference. Now, concerning my personal journal, I have, I can say 2 words. About my experience. As we know, I started working at the UN as Minister Counselor of the Greek Ministry of Foreign Affairs since a number of years. I participated in the work of the Commission on the Status of Women, the Commission on Social Development, other bodies of the UN, like Subcommittee of the General Assembly, Human Rights Council, ECOSOC, etc. I think the work done within the United Nations is really very interesting. One could say fascinating. I could even qualify it as a kind an international resource center where you can learn many things about people all over the world, like the indigenous people, like women victims of gender-based violence, like human rights defenders, child soldiers, child marriage, etc., etc. And you can also read very good reports written by experts on these issues. You can also sometimes hear people suffering from different scourges describe their experiences orally. For me, this knowledge is invaluable. One also had the opportunity to meet, has the opportunity to meet remarkable people. One such person I met who made a difference was Sizani Gnubane from South Africa, an indigenous rural woman. Sizani succeeded in becoming a leader in her society. In the 90s, she created the Rural Women's Movement to deal with serious violations of women's rights, which included inheritance rights, rights to land, to property, rights against gender-based violence. The Rural Women's Movement led by Sizani was the leader of a successful lawsuit against the Communal Land Rights Act of 2004 that was declared unconstitutional because it was unfair and enshrined gender bias. The Rural Women's Movement was also very active in exposing mining deals that failed to benefit the rural citizens. Members of Rural Women's Movement became aware of all these rights, but they also learned how to fight to promote them. As I started following, you can see me now in camera, after all. So, about Sudan. So the Rural Women's Movement was also very active in exposing mining deals that failed to benefit rural citizens. Members of this organization became aware of all these rights. As I started following the work of Sizani more closely, I realized she was an outstanding individual who inspired public policies and strategies that made for a real lasting difference in the lives of people living in poverty, in particular women. It was then I had the idea to propose to her that IAW could nominate her for the Woman of Distinction Award given by NGO CSW New York. At first, she refused, telling me she did not have the qualifications needed. She did not have a university degree and had not even finished school, and she had to look after her siblings because her mother every day had to travel a long way to go to work. Finally, she accepted and she won the prize, which made her very happy. Sizani and her organization had many friends, but had also many enemies, because she was a woman human rights defender. Her house was constantly broken and looted, but she had always a smile in her face and she was full of kindness and love. What really surprised me were the organizational principles on the basis of which the Rural Women's Movement was established. This had to do with deepening of democracy, gender parity representation at all levels of the movement, innovative communication, consensus decision-making, contesting undemocratic and corrupt practices that impact rural citizens. In my view, Sizani must be recognized in the history of rights of women and girls in South Africa and beyond. We need people like her. Only with her support and vision we can build a better world. I consider the help and support my organization and myself as president of it at the time gave to Sizani as one of my biggest accomplishments in the context of my work at the UN. And now I have, can I say 2 words?
Just 2 words, please wrap
My
it up, Joanna.
challenges while working at the UN. Well, my biggest challenges came when I was elected president of the International Alliance of Women, an international feminist organization with consultative status to ECOSOC since 1947. We are represented not only at the UN, but in specialized agencies of the UN, like ILO. We are also represented at the Council of Europe. We have participatory status. IAW is also a member of the board of the European Women's Lobby. We are also represented at the Arab League, the African Union, and other intergovernmental organizations. We have around 50 member organizations situated all over the world, as well as individual members. I think they must be around 400. So the challenges I faced had to do with the following. Respect of the constitution of the alliance, good governance, professionalism, and democratic rules. The IAW was founded in 1904 by suffragettes and others. IAW works for the empowerment of women, the promotion of women's human rights and gender equality globally, and is based in Geneva. In recent years, submitted reports on the issues I referred to, like democratic rules, good governance, professional, and so on, just to motivate discussion. It's by discussing that you can solve problems and understand better what is the problem. I also try to empower new members that I found were competent and knowledgeable, but proposing to them to become officers in different fields. For example, representatives
Joanna,
in international
Joanna, can you hear me?
Specialized agencies of the UN, commissioners, etc. I try to deal with these challenges by working hard, trying to understand the problems faced by all sides, showing integrity, honesty, and trusting people. And I must say that at the end of my second term, which was in November 2020, during the virtual Congress we were having, many people spoke very
Monique, you will have to stop spotlighting her, I think, and
about
we'll take the rest of her
my
statement.
work as the president. And this for me was, you know,
she can't hear me.
very
Monique,
positive.
Monique, you will have
very good, because at least someone had noticed my efforts.
You hear headphones,
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Joanna. You've been a personal inspiration to me personally. Some of you will remember the epic snowstorm that closed down the UN during CSW years ago. Joanna walked several blocks in a foot of snow to join me at my hotel, to invite me and my colleague Antonia Levine to join the International Alliance for Women, which we did. I'm so pleased to introduce next Cheryl Hales, the current president of the International Alliance of Women. Through her leadership, IAW launched the Water and Pads Initiative to bring menstrual health education to schoolgirls in Burkina Faso, Cameroon, Congo, Malawi, Pakistan, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. Previously, she was vice president of international relations for the National Board of the Canadian Federation of University Women for 2 terms. where she created a mentorship program for women in STEM, politics, and organizational leadership. Cheryl also serves on the board of the Olympe de la Parole Canada, a global speech competition for young women high school students. A beloved French bilingual educator from Canada, Cheryl is principal of a kindergarten to grade 8 school with over 1,000 students. Cheryl, please.
Good day, everyone. Thank you, Madam Moderator, for the mic. And thank you, Sun Young, for your inspiring work with youth in particular. You do so much, but today is our focus is on youth. And thank you for the invitation to speak and be part of the panel. I'd like to acknowledge all my fellow panelists. I am so inspired by each of your story, and I'm so pleased at the diversity of the stories and the diversity of your journeys. So it is my honor to be part of this group. I was born in Jamaica, a most beautiful Caribbean island. My early years were spent with my tribe in a space that nurtured the innocent development of children. The environment was structured around freedom. I played freely with my friends at our home or theirs. We lived in a place that was surrounded by family and the oral history of our family. Families were multi-generational. I went a little bit too fast there with my cursor. Just one sec. Didn't think it went that far, or maybe I have lots to say. Families were multi-generational and everyone had a role and responsibility in the success of the family. We grew our own food in the vegetable garden. We cooked our own meals and enjoyed the fruits of the trees that the generations before us had planted. The ancestors had provided for our existence. The whole village was connected in some way. This created a sense of community and a bond between families based on shared beliefs and respect for each other. We went to bed when the sun said goodbye to the day and woke up when the sun kissed the horizon. When I entered my teenage years and started high school, I had to wake up before dawn to catch the bus to school because we were in a rural village. Before that, we walked to school every day as a group with no adult supervision other than the relatives who kept an eye on us as we passed their house to get to school. Everyone knew everyone else's children and engaged in raising them. I attended the oldest school on the island, Manning's High School, which started educating children in 1738. It is the oldest continuous operating high school in Jamaica. Its motto is, "Life without learning is death." Obviously, those early years shaped who I am today. The word volunteer was not part of my vocabulary back then on the island, but we supported each other and took care of each other through church or community organized events. Youth groups were formed in the church and spilled over to serve the community. After our immigration to Canada, I went to McGill University and then continued my master's education at Université de Besançon in France. Obviously, we had to learn a new language in Canada. Canada was different. The connections were not organic. One had to make an effort to make friends and integrate. We learned a new language and a different way of creating community. Community was organized along lines of interests, religion, and therefore often excluded other, whatever other may be. The new culture also influenced how I navigate the world today. I was hungry to learn this new system, the city life of Montreal that was not constructed around a village sensibility, but built by the government for a massive population. Government regulations, water and food came from elsewhere. I looked for common interests among my peers in school, but I also looked for who was left out and problem solved how I could bring them into the circle of care. I identify with other, and at the same time, I am confident in who I am. I attribute my confidence to my early years because I was raised in a safe environment. Our second question today is, when you were growing up, who was the most influential adult in your life besides your parents? My teachers were the most influential people in my life apart from my parents. Mrs. Ramsey in grade 1, Miss Weatherburn in grade 3, and Miss Brown in grades 5 and 6. She was strict, but had good intentions. The other two had softer edges. The Sunday school teachers were also influential. They were more like big sisters because they were high school students from the village. Some were in teachers' college. They were all Black women who knew their power, purpose, and potential. I have always had strong female role models in my life. When I look back, I see how these divas shape the way I navigate the world today. I believe women are strong and competent, and women are entitled to be in charge of whatever they choose to do. Our third question is, how did I get involved in the United Nations and gender equality issues? Simple story. I had a garage sale, and a lady who lived down the street, Margaret Gray, a member of the Canadian Federation of University Women, stopped and purchased a blouse. And for those who don't know what a garage sale is, it's all of the things that you don't use anymore. You put it out in your garage, in your driveway, and the neighborhood, and people drive by and stop and purchase it for a reduced price. So I had one of those. She was a retired teacher and I was a teacher, so we started an easy conversation. She invited me to CFUW to attend a meeting to see if I liked it. I have a very compassionate heart, so I find purpose in helping others and working for a better world. At that meeting, they were asking for volunteers to help with the program. I volunteered to be their program coordinator. Then I became the VP the following year, then president of CFUW Milton and District. I transitioned to become the regional director for 2 terms, and then VP International for the national organization. At the national level, I served 2 terms as well. I led our delegation, our Canadian delegation, to the CSW conferences, prepared our written and oral statements, and coordinated the delegates for an optimal engagement with the UN, all the while learning the UN system myself. My second year, I boldly jumped and decided to organize a parallel event on women's economic empowerment and mentorship. I had created a mentorship program for STEM and leadership, so I had content to share. The third year, I did a research project on rural women and their experience with gender-based violence, in particular, Indigenous Canadian women, and presented that as a parallel event. That got me more and more interested in how the UN works and how we can bring the voices of women to an international level in order to seek similarities and address the challenges that we all face as women. Our fourth question is, do you support the idea of a youth council and a future summit in 2023? I absolutely support the idea of a youth council. In my professional life, I work with students to support their growth and development to become global citizens. I would like to see our youth involved in the discussions about their future. I see youth as smart and wise, and at the same time as young leaders and learners. Intergenerational wisdom is the only way to address an issue in a 360-degree perspective. What we must be mindful of in this process is inclusion. That matters because we often engage who we know and the others are still left behind. The Youth Council has to be representative of and include racial, linguistic, cultural, multiple gender, sexual self-identifications, religious, economic, geographic diversity. It has to actively seek to include those who are not seen and heard as often as others. Our fifth question is, what advice do you have for young women to become global leaders? I would advise young women to get involved. Pick a sustainable development issue locally and learn all about it. Look for solutions. Engage your friends, engage your parents, engage your community. Create think tanks, create your own solutions, and be confident that you have something to offer to the world. Our common agenda focuses on breakthrough in order to prevent breakdowns. The breakthroughs are designed to create a more sustainable, peaceful future for our people and planet. It is one that includes everyone for the benefit of the common good. I would also say to young women, don't believe anyone who tries to make you feel less than. Do believe that you are good enough, that you are smart enough and committed enough. Just be you with your own girl boss inspired rules. Some of those rules may be the most brilliant we have seen yet. To conclude, if we're seeking the counsel of the youth, we must also respect their counsel as they present it and incorporate what they have to share. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cheryl, for sharing your journey from an island village to the global network of the International Alliance of Women. Next, we have Dr. Uzma Gul, a mentor consultant, a USAID designated young master trainer, and social political activist based in New York. Trained as a pharmacist, Dr. Gul believes that change comes about not by prescribing medications, but by changing the mindsets of young people in healthy and positive ways. She specializes in learning and development projects for national and multilateral institutions focused on youth development and healthcare. Dr. Gul.
Hi everyone, I'm Uzma, born and raised in Pakistan. I came from a country that is based on patriarchy, where social organizations are complex. Religion, tribe, culture, social class influence people around you and thoughts around you and make it tough for you to live. So I am blessed today to be invited on this panel to talk to you about the journey I had. I thank everyone on the panel who spoke before me and Sun Yang for having me here. I started my activism from a very young age. The path I opted at such a young age was not welcomed by many, not even my family. Of course, being a young girl, being an unmarried girl from eastern part of the world, you need someone from your family to support you and to stand by your side when you are doing social changes and you're becoming a change maker and you're dealing with the men in your country. And in my case, it was my mother who stood up by my side. When I was a child, people used to ask me whether I want to be a doctor, engineer, or lawyer. And I still remember taking some names. To mention a few, it was Mother Teresa. I was mesmerized by her love for humanity. Then Princess Diana. She was such a kind soul and an empath. And also, I would like to mention my country's ex-prime minister, who was a woman, Benazir Bhutto, because the time when I was growing up, these were the women I look up to, who were a symbol to me for strength, for courage, for speaking up as a woman. So after my mother, I saw them as a role model for speaking up as a woman. Later, my journey was shaped and guided by my mentors, other leaders and trainers whom I met on my journey and learned a lot. They were the ones who defined my vision. They were the one who shaped my journey. They were the one who carved my ways and gave me courage to stand up for myself and for all others and made me who I am today in front of you. As I mentioned earlier, I came from a society where misogyny and patriarchy is deeply rooted. Gender justice, the fight for gender justice, starts from when you are conceived. And by that, I mean, you're not even born then. And that fight continues throughout your life. Either you're a boss, either you're a maid, either you are married, not married, you're a mother of 3, or you're a dead body, or maybe a patient. You face these injustice and you face these scenarios where you are a woman and you face the trouble throughout your life. And you're left with no other option but to continue facing it or take a stand for yourself and for all others around you. And this is how, after all what I faced in my life, I become one of those loud voices, creating some noise for women empowerment, and found my tribe, of course, of the global fierce feminists across the globe. But the work I would like to mention here to all the young female leaders who are listening to me right now, that the work you do is never easy. It comes with difficulties, hardships, and consequences. I also had to pay the price for the work I did for women empowerment, for youth sustainability, for peace building, or strengthening democracy. And tomorrow, 25 of March, it will be like 3 years to the day.
So you say we have to, I have my vaccination card, but we need also a health screen. Oh, wow.
Tomorrow will mark 3 years to the day when I left my country before I was abducted. I was formally attached with Commonwealth Youth Council, and after coming to United States, I joined United Nations as a youth representative, where I am able to speak up for myself and for all other women and youth who are facing maybe more worst case more than me. I was listening to Ms. Espinosa and Ms. Yusuf, who mentioned the Future Summit 2023. I myself am working on intergenerational dialogues and making youth groups. And after the global pandemic, the world scenario has changed dramatically. So of course, I also support the idea of Future Summit 2023 to forge a new global consensus to what are our demands and what our future should be like and what should we do to secure it. By bringing people together, it's a good move to find solutions. And in current times, I think this is the need to bring in more people and to bring in more voices and to decide what we see in our future and what we want our future to be like. Little advice I would like to give to young women is don't let anybody ever tell you that you are not worthy or the work you are doing is not up to the mark, because I know that what you are doing, it takes a lot of determination, a lot of courage, strength, power, and balls to get where you are and to do what you do. So don't let anybody ever try to tell you that you are not worthy because you are a woman. And also, if you're coming into a change maker field and you want to become an activist or you want to see yourself as a global leader in future, don't forget the 3 M's. Of course, the first one is not money, the method, the myth, and the magic. The method is how you want your path to be, how you want your journey to look like. Either you are coming from grassroots as a social activist, you are coming as a political leader where you are in charge of bringing the change, or maybe you're coming from social NGOs where you are making the policies and strategizing the plans for people. Then come the myth, where people start to see your existence. They start to listen to you. They start to hear you because you are creating some waves and you are bringing the change. After that, when you find your standing position, you find your ground base, then comes the magic. And the magic is where you let people to identify you and connect with you, and you do the same. You find your people, you identify them, and you connect with them, and it works vice versa. the thing is, the key is to be in charge, to take the responsibility. Women issues are important, but all other issues are important as well. So pick one, as Ms. Cheryl was saying, pick one, do work on that, find like-minded people around you, give you 100%, and it will come back, because I truly believe that women of the world have the power to change the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Uzma. Method, myth, and magic. We have one final speaker, Safira Rameshwar, and then Sun Young will offer closing remarks. Safira is a representative of the Baha'i International Community at the UN based in New York. She served as co-chair of the Faith and Feminism Working Group to the UN, co-chair of the Working Group on Girls to the UN, and on the Youth Steering Committee of the UN Department of Global Communications. Previously, Safira, an Australian national, worked for the Australian federal government in Canberra. She has worked for over a decade on projects aimed at the empowerment of youth in Australia, as well as communities throughout the Asia Pacific region, North and South America. Safira.
Thank you so much, Emily. And thank you all to our speakers. It's the privilege of going last, is that we really get to listen to these stories and insights that all of you have shared. So thank you so much for having me. I thought I could just start perhaps by sharing a little bit of an overview about what I've been seeing here at the Commission on the Status of Women this year, kind of speaking to the intergenerational nature of this event. And I just wanted to share, to this theme of this priority theme of climate, environment, and disaster risk reduction, just to speak a little bit to the role of young people during this commission and how much young people have really been at the forefront of the climate movement and what they've brought to this CSW this year in terms of their coordinating capacity. So well organized, the thoughtful language, the markups have been informed by vast experience, just what young people have been able to achieve on the ground within their schools, within the communities, kind of transitioning infrastructure and processes towards more sustainability and being at the forefront of climate action. And so to this point about, the report One Common Agenda and, young people kind of being experts, not only in youth experience, but also in leading change on the ground. Of course, we want to have those with the most experience in these international fora. And so what this demonstrates to me is this piece about meaningful participation and about identity, and that regardless of age, gender, race, nationality, that this first identity of being human and being part of a global civilization, that there are these strengths and experiences and unique perspectives that can be brought to bear in these international spaces when there has been substantial practical experience generated on the ground. So I just wanted to highlight how outstanding that has been for young people operating in the commission this year, of which, I have just been able to support young people kind of coming in and sharing their grassroots experience. So that has been really wonderful. I wanted to share a little bit about kind of the experience, the grassroots experience of which I'm most familiar, which is the community building efforts of the Baha'i community. So to tie it into my personal story, I'm from Northern Australia, as was mentioned, from a very small farming community, which is known for its mangoes and its avocados. And I went to the one school in that town. I was actually very lucky to have access to a school. Other children in my area had to be educated over the radio. It was called the School of the Air, and there just wasn't that access. So in addition to having an access to a physical school, I was also very lucky to be involved in the Baha'i community building efforts of the Baha'i community. And those Baha'i contributions towards the betterment of society really focus on building capacities needed to create lasting change. So for example, the capacity to read reality and assess the local needs and challenges, to identify local resources, to kind of coming up with potential paths forward. And so the worldwide community, the worldwide Baha'i community, is steadily expanding a global process of education, which assists participants to apply these principles of justice and equality to our daily lives and also to the life of society. And so what's really powerful about that educational process is that it allows each person to see themselves as an agent of change. It draws large numbers of people together. And we're seeing many, many young people come into this educational process. And so when I was young, having access to this, I also was reading my reality. And something that I noticed in the farming community where I was growing up was that in some years, farmers wouldn't pick the fruit on their trees. There'd be these trees dripping with ripe, delicious mangoes, but they would be left to rot. And it really upset me because I love mangoes and my family also grew mangoes on our property. But I came to understand the injustice that was happening to farmers and the way that they would be being squeezed by supermarket monopolies, market fluctuations, and they couldn't sell their produce. And when you kind of think about it at the aggregate, in parts of the world where there's famine, in parts of the world where there isn't access to food and adequate nutrition, here in my part of the world, which was growing, mangoes, avocados, so much produce, and farmers couldn't sell it and couldn't get it to market. And that really stuck with me, this feeling of injustice, and was something that drove and inspired me to want to work for the dignity of everyone to earn a livelihood in a fair and a dignified way, and to this principle of the oneness of humanity, that there's this piece of equality of all people was something that I really wanted to work towards and I wanted to dedicate my life to. So that moved me eventually to work for the Australian government and then onto the United Nations. And so that has really felt like an ever advancing, ever widening understanding of the complex and dynamic and interrelated issues that humanity faces. And such a privilege to be able to speak to some of these issues here at the UN and try to make a contribution to a better world in this lifetime. So now here at the UN, I just wanted to say a couple of words about governance and governance at the international level, requiring new systems and new structures that are more suited to the challenges that humanity is facing today. And so advances in the operation of these systems that we're trying to design also requires a change in the way that humans function within those systems, that is equally important. And so the UN is also very uniquely positioned to demonstrate a culture of equality, a culture of gender equality, and what that looks like at the international level. So for example, creating open and deliberative spaces among its agencies, among civil society, among all of these actors, being able to harmonize diverse processes, particularly related to gender equality, to inclusion, and then learning how its internal structure can increasingly reflect these principles. So our ultimate aim as an international community, but also at every level of society, is to harness the power of unified thought into action. So maybe just to summarize in terms of, to this question that all of the panelists have been posed, what advice do you have for young women in terms of reshaping this culture of global leadership? The first piece I would say would be striving to embody these principles, to be an example of a culture of humility, of openness, of authenticity, to learn about how our attitudes and our posture and our interactions can increasingly reflect principles of equality, and to make a contribution in shaping the environment that we operate with to be more aligned with these principles. The second is to bring unique qualities, these unique qualities that are typically associated with the feminine, to bring them to the fore. And so, for example, an inclination towards more collaboration and inclusion, a disposition towards care, towards encouragement, towards selflessness, a tendency to prioritize longer-term interests, to consider the well-being of future generations. So to kind of explore the human impact of policies more broadly, and looking at these tools that formulate more conscious programs and policy and strategy, and that also lend themselves to building more resilient communities. And then the final recommendation that I would offer for young women is to master the art of consultation and collaboration. And I think more and more we're needing to be able to collectively search for truth, to build consensus, to be open to dialogue, more so than competition. And notions of competition and contests that tend to dominate a lot of the current systems that we are operating in, from our educational systems to our workplace, to the way that we even advocate for certain issues. But that the more we can truly consult and truly find points of collaboration, that these skills and capacities will move us not only in our personal lives, but at every level of governance and every level of social organization. It will move us to a higher level of functioning. So
Thank you so much, Safira.
Thank you, Emily.
Thank you for sharing your journey from a mango farm in Northern Australia to the heart of global issues at the UN. And now back to Soon Young, the architect and engineer of today's event.
You know, thank you so much for staying with us. Almost everyone has hung on. I actually wanted to talk a little bit to the point that had been raised about the Futures Summit, which is a little bit our focus of our common agenda, which is to say that we have heard so many wonderful stories from different streams of the women's movement, actually. And there are three major streams that I see coming up in the near future that I think we need to focus on bringing to the Futures Summit. They're all conceived of as kind of accelerators. You have the Generation Equality Forum, which Maria mentioned. Ooh, by the way, Maria is a co-chair of the C4UN group, and we thank her for that. We have the HLPF, the High Level Political Forum, coming up with the Sustainable Development Goals. We have this process that is around the C4UN following of the UN, but we also have the Paris Climate Accord, we have UN Habitat. In all of those places, we, the feminist and women's movement and young people, are there, but we have not come together to imagine one vision for the Future Summit. So I would like to challenge us all from our different places to come together more, to do what Safira suggested, which is to do much more consultation across our different silos, across our different processes. So I'm just putting into the chat a few references for where we can find each other. And I would really like to thank all of you for being with us today, and to Emily for being our co-moderator. And let's continue the conversation and the consultation. Thank you very much. I'm saying goodbye.